Thank you very much for the invitation. And I am kicking off, and I'm going to talk about the way White Ribbon has engaged men in challenging men's violence against women and girls. And I tend to speak for about 25, 30 minutes. And if people have then any questions, which I hope they have, we can deal with those. And after that, the floor is Thomas's, and then hopefully we will provoke some discussion between each other. So there's a lot in my presentation of a lot of illustrations and pictures, so that if people don't have English as a first language, they will see the pictures, and that is also good. So this is me, and my standard presentation also says, why me? Because people say, well, why should I get involved? And my response is, why shouldn't you? You must. It's your responsibility, and you have to get involved in challenging men's violence against women and girls. So I will answer the why me question and how I can as we go on. But first, to set a bit of context, I'm not going to do any statistics about things, but just a few feelings, violence against women. And these, I've got a couple of slides here from young people who ended up in a refuge. And in the UK alone, 750,000 children witness violence in their own home each year. 750,000 each year. And this is the sort of thing which they then think about it. I think it's when your dad bosses your mum around and things like hurting her, shouting, and she gets scared, and so do we, and it's not right when your dad is that kind of dad. So an 8-year-old can work out that it's not right. A 10-year-old similarly says, this isn't right, and this isn't fair. And if they can work it out like that, surely we all know it isn't right, it isn't fair, and we have to be engaged. So my next activity is to throw the floor open, although that's a bit dangerous because we're not a huge group, and imagine a world without violence against women and girls. What would it be like? And people often come up with suggestions like, well, like the words on the screen. And who doesn't want to live in a world which is fair, safe, equal, exciting, free? Extraordinary. That's a great world to live in. So that's a world without violence against women and girls. The scary word which somebody once presented me with was, it would be normal. And yes, so why aren't we doing something about having a world which is normal? What prevents it? And again, throw this open to your audience, and they can come up with words like lack of education, or indeed, maybe the education people are receiving. Ignorance, men who are in denial, traditions that we've learnt along the way from our family or our peer group or our community, a sense of entitlement and a sense of self-interest. Lots of other things people throw out, and it gets the group talking if you do an exercise like this. And what do we men need to do? And again, people would say, well, you need to educate yourselves, you need to challenge yourselves, you need to change. Oh, in the previous question, what prevents it? Often some people will say men, and thereby lies the issue that we've got to deal with. That's why we have to do the work of self-education, challenge, and change ourselves. So that fits neatly into what White Ribbon does. And one of our first slogans when we set up in the UK 15, 16 years ago was ask, listen, respect. And that's still one of our slogans today. Ask women what we should be doing. And we regularly work with up to 20 women's organisations around the country, ranging from very established ones which have been going for 40 or 50, 100 years. The Women's Institute started in 1915, and they have branches everywhere, and I did an event with them this year, to Reclaim the Night demonstrations, Feminista, very campaigning organisation, Object. I do object to objectification of women's bodies and organisations like this. So a wide range of women's organisations. So we ask them what we should be doing. We listen to their response, and we respect their response by taking some action about what they say we should be doing. And I'm pleased to say that White Ribbon in the UK has responded to their changes and their suggestions, and certainly we've changed policy on a couple of things in the light of suggestions from the women's movement. There we are. So, 3 reasons why men's violence is women's and men's issue. It's our responsibility, as I say, we commit 90% of interpersonal violence. Women's organisations time and again say, why aren't men doing more to organise and challenge men's violence? And men can be good role models for other men. They are role models, whether we like it or not. And so it's better if men can be good role models. And so that's hugely important for men to see other men doing the sort of work that we do, because then they might just say, hey, yeah, I didn't like the way that guy catcalled that woman before. I think I might do something about it next time. If they see you taking an initiative, they will also say, yeah, I agree with you, mate. And I think that's really supportive. So men are role models for other men, and it's good if men can be good role models for other men. A couple more slides to set the scene, and then I'm going to talk about what we try and do about it. This year, there's been in the UK an enormous tide of angry women saying, more than ever before, we are angry with what's been going on. And then there's been a little bit of a backlash. So I tend to put this slide up. If you're tired of reading about our work, our experiences, imagine how tired we are of living them. And that's hashtag yes all women. And I've got a hashtag in a minute called all men can, which I'm going to show you. Again, some of the men's rights people say, oh, it's not all men, you know. There's been a big hashtag, not all men. It might be not all men, but it's always a man committing violence against women and girls. And it's not all men, but if you were given a box of chocolates and told that 1 out of every 10 of them wasn't very nice, you might be wary of all of the box of chocolates. And so that's why it's up to us to take action. So what does White Ribbon do? It's really, really simple. You wear a white ribbon and it means you are committed to never committing, excusing, or remaining silent about violence against women and girls. And a number of our supporters in the past wrote down why they want to end men's violence against women. And one guy wrote very simply, I want to end male violence against women because it's wrong. Violence against women will only cease when men stand up and challenge other men, their attitudes and beliefs. And he went on, silence is not an option. Silence excuses domestic violence, trafficking, pornography, the sex trade, female genital mutilation, so-called honour-based violence and rape. And that is why silence is not an option. That is why we have to speak out about it. And that is what we try and do. A very simple slogan. And sometimes I've met people who said, oh yeah, White Ribbon, oh yeah, it's about anti-violence, isn't it? I thought, yeah, you're getting enough of the message, that'll do. I don't want them to be able to know exactly the definition, but I want them to, more and more people to have some inkling of what it's about. Like this little lad with his dad in a rugby team there, wearing a white ribbon on their shirts for an important cup game, and the little lad gets a sticker on, and he might remember, yeah, my dad won the cup that day, blah, blah, blah. And it was about White Ribbon. Again, re-emphasis. We have to speak out. What hurt the victim most was the silence of the bystander, the fact that the man was not listening, the fact that the man did not speak out about it. And just this year, I said we've had a big campaign, a big tidal wave of women speaking out about the issue, and also then quite a lot of calls for men to be doing more. So a big advertising company contacted us and said, we want to do more pro bono, what can we do? And this is what they came up with. And this is one of 5,000 hoardings that went up around the UK, and you can see it's on a motorway, it's got a clock on the bottom, it's a big advertising hoarding, which they're not using this year because of there's not so much sales going on, but we can know that it might not be our fault, but it's still our responsibility. And there's that hashtag, all men can. And they did a number of these slogans around the UK. They weren't, we didn't have much say on it, except to make sure that they weren't saying anything offensive. But it was not hard hitting, it was just about a nudge campaign. Stop thinking there's nothing we can do. Promise to never look the other way. Learn that us not being violent is not enough. We have to take action and talk to our neighbours, friends and colleagues. It might not be our fault, but it's our responsibility. We can know it's our job to notice when a woman feels uncomfortable, not wait for her to tell us and ask for help. Just say, whoa, we must take action. So they put these slides up there, and that's the hashtag all men can. But if you look at that hashtag now, there's not a lot going on. And that's the problem. It has to be an ongoing campaign all the time, not just a one-off, outpouring of outrage. We're going to do something and then we're going to stop. It has to be ongoing. And somebody 10 years ago now asked me a question from the audience. I was giving a presentation. Oh, White Ribbon, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And this young woman from the audience at the university said, yeah, I've got a question. Why aren't you doing more? And I thought, I'm a volunteer, you know, I'm doing this. And that was a crushing thing to do. But it was also the right thing to say, because women are dying. 1 in 3 women around the world, 1 in 4 women around the world suffer violence against women and girls. It's not my job to say why I'm not doing more. It's my job to say that I need to do more. That's my responsibility. So I'm going to move on to now, quick 10 minutes on what White Ribbon actually does. And first, I'm going to talk about influencing change. This, again, I can get pride sometimes from the slides. Where we got here, I'm not even sure if I can name all these people, but see how many you might be able to recognise. Top corner, we have the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, the Mayor of Manchester, ex-Speaker of the House of Commons, the Mayor of London, First Minister of Scotland, Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the Labour Party until very recently, etc., etc. A bunch of MPs, Cherie Blair, who, the wife of the former Prime Minister, the British Ambassador to the United Nations, ex-Home Secretary, ex-Prime Minister, presenter of Channel 4 News, and can anybody offer me who that man in the white is? His white doesn't show up very well. It's the Pope, and we were privileged to offer him a plaque which said "All Faiths United Against Violence Against Women and Girls," which he gratefully received, Pope Francis. And we also gave him a rugby shirt, which I haven't seen him wearing yet, a blue rugby shirt, which was from the Italian Rugby League Federation. Unfortunately, I was in Australia when this happened. I would have loved the photo of myself with the Pope, but that's why I'm not in the picture. But honestly, my spirit was there. So influencing change, yeah, okay, very important, all these politicians, but again, it's a bit like one-off. They're all quite keen to do stuff around November. But if we're going to influence change, this for me is much more important. This is called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for White Ribbon. Within the Parliament, we have about 15 active MPs who are part of it. But for me, it's really important because it focuses, like White Ribbon, on what men should be doing. There's a very much more active all-party parliamentary group against domestic violence and against violence against women and girls. Guess what? Not many male MPs go to that. I think about 2, and one of them will be the chair of the White Ribbon campaign. But to have a separate White Ribbon all-party parliamentary group, we might just drag in some of the other MPs, and then we can say, look, it is your responsibility to be doing this work. And there they are. We've got a fancy White Ribbon banner for the all-party parliamentary group, and there they are at a meeting. That's Gavin Williams, Gavin Newlands, who's the chair of the group, who's an SNP MP. And a little story about him. He only, like I would say a lot of men, he was playing rugby one day, and he said, this guy came up to me and he says, oh, you're interested in White Ribbon, aren't you? Here's a White Ribbon sticker. Let's talk about it. And he says, I didn't know anything about it. So I had to go off and investigate the organisation because I didn't know what it was. And so he then found out more about it. And what he really said, I had no idea of the extent of violence against women and girls nationally, internationally, and in my constituency. And I represent these people. And he has been so active in the last 8 years or so since we bumped into him on the rugby pitch when we were playing a White Ribbon 15 against the Parliamentarians 15, again as a way of trying to get more men involved. This is something which people can do, which doesn't cost anything. So there we are. There's a guy with a photo frame. Doesn't cost anything to get one, very little to get one of those made up, and then people can use it to have their pictures taken. On the ski resorts, down at the bottom there, you've got a few tea lights. We've got some school children making up a white ribbon by standing in a white ribbon. A flower bed, which is still extant in Cardiff, in Wales. And somebody sent me a photograph of that last week. That's from about 5 years ago now. And Christmas, people have Christmas lights. And we said, why don't you have, instead of just ones which have Santa Claus running across the road, have ones which express the Christmas spirit, say love and respect, and we'll sponsor it. And in fact, there's no, we don't need to. We're going to have to pay out for some more lights anyway. And they said, we'll put a white ribbon on them because we are a council which is committed to white ribbon activities. Okay, my next point is to talk about, this is the big one for me, accreditation. I call this the multiplier. How we make the work of 2 or 3 people and a very small budget go an awful lot further. That's absolutely the maximum amount of money we ever have to spend in a year. And what we have to realize is we've got nearly 100 organizations accredited now, which have a massively greater number of staff than we do. They support the population across vast parts of the country, the whole of Wales, the whole of Scotland, lots of other big areas, and they have a huge purchasing power. And some of the authorities now are saying, okay, in their purchasing, we are going to do it as part of our accreditation. We're going to ask the people who supply us things whether they're doing enough to involve men in challenging male violence against women and girls. And these are the sorts of organisations which are accredited to our standards. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our standards as we go down. Health organisations, housing organisations, a lot of city councils, police forces, obviously, fire and rescue services. Fire and rescue service, I had no idea that they were very involved with our work, wanted to be involved in our work, because men set fire to their partner's house. I just didn't realise people would be so barbaric. Sports clubs, commercial companies, trade unions, university schools. We have just done an accreditation for the Rail Track UK, who run all the railways in Britain, but we haven't got a railway train named White Ribbon Express yet, which I'm very disappointed at. We've got some fire engines which have a huge white ribbon logo on the side, and that's great because they go into schools and they take the message with us. They're not taking the white ribbon message directly, they're going into talk to the kids about not setting fires, but indirectly they say, why is that big white ribbon on the side of your bus, mate? And they get talking about it, and that's great because the fire crews, then they have to understand what white ribbon's about, and they pass the message on to the young people. So this is what people have to do if they want accreditation. They have to have a important person running, like at a director level, leading their white ribbon strategy, ensure that the chief executive or the company chair or something like that says, yes, we think it's a good idea. Have at least half a dozen ambassadors who will take the campaign forward within their organisation. Encourage their members or their staff to all sign our White Ribbon Pledge, which is simple enough to do, but it gets really important. Have a way of reporting, assessing and dealing with incidents of abuse. Put up appropriate signage and documentation. This incidentally is a picture of a disco, if you like, or a nightclub, which went for White Ribbon accreditation, and then they renewed it 5 years later, which I was very pleased with. You know, they said, well, all our staff support it. It's good for our users and our members as well. You have to display appropriate information around the place, involve the local community. Some people who haven't got any money to pay for an accreditation fee, we say, okay, well, have a fundraising event instead and do publicity for us, and very often you'll raise the money that way. And vitally as well, recognise and mark the UN International Day to Eradicate Violence Against Women and Girls, which some people call White Ribbon Day, November the 25th. This is an example of what accreditation achieves in terms of multiplying our effectiveness as an organisation. Blackpool Council is a small northwest council in the northwest of England. Not a huge population, maybe a population of about 50,000, but they involved all their employees in White Ribbon activities. They contacted the local hospital. They've got lots of nightclubs, the local faith-based communities, the schools, the college, police, housing, local women's aid, and the children's centre. And 2 years ago, they had something called with Blackpool Illuminations. They have, you can see a picture of that at the top there, to try and attract people when it gets cold. It's a seaside resort. They put all these fantastic lights up, and they said, well, we'll have a white ribbon one at the end. And this year, which I haven't got any photographs of because of lockdown, so I couldn't go there, they had it right the way across the street, a big arch. This is what they did 2 years ago. And the joy for me is that's attended by 3.5 million people. And so they just see that message there, and that's all I'm after. Oh, they also, that big tower, which you can see in the background there, it's called Blackpool Tower. And around November, they light that up in white, but that doesn't show anything, just sort of white. It doesn't say, this is a white ribbon. But again, getting the message out there. And that's just one example. And very interestingly, talking about cooperation with women's organisations, one women organisation contacted and said, why don't you make it a condition of accreditation that city councils have to stop having lap dancing clubs, strip clubs? And we said, yeah, it's a brilliant idea. So we just added it to the requirements, and that's caused more discussion within local councils than anything else. And Blackpool, which is, because it's a nighttime economy, had 3 of these lap dancing clubs. I said, okay, we are working towards having 0 of these. Over the next few years, when one of these companies gives up, we will not allow anybody to come and take over that club. And for me, that's a real positive move. To have that discussion going on in the newspapers is a real push for respect and equality for women. Of course, they shouldn't have any, but they exist, and the fact they're moving towards 0 is a real step in the right direction. The other thing we require is that organisations should have ambassadors, and these are the sort of people who become ambassadors. All sorts of ordinary folk. Okay, and a picture of one of the smaller venue plans, what goes out to not just nightclubs, but also to festivals. And these are guys at one of the punk festivals who signed up to support our work. I think it's a great photo, guys with hair like that saying they support White Ribbon Campaign. Why do people become ambassadors? Why not? And the joy, I think, is of those is the 4th one down. Because I'm a member of a network, it helps keep me motivated. I talk to the other guys, and it's really important. And I think that's why people do need support in doing this work. And they might not ought to need support, but we all need support. And becoming involved in the network, becoming supported by other people, means that these people are able to keep going with the importance of the work. Okay, another one for you to identify, not political celebrities, but these are general celebrities. Really important, it's really good that at the Caesar Awards, which are the French equivalent of the Oscars, this really important actress and lots of other people, I can't remember, she's somebody really important, you might identify her, but I can't. They all wore their white ribbons because it was the part of the Me Too thing, and they realised this is going on through the entertainment industry all over the place. And so it's really good to have people that everybody recognises and wearing their white ribbon. Paul McCartney there, that's a very young Meghan Markle, who is married to one of the royal families, the one who lives in America now. Moeen Ali is a famous cricketer. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the captain of the Welsh rugby team, the president of World Rugby, David Tennant, who used to be Doctor Who, and the Pope again, because he's quite important. There we are. But I'm not that interested in them. I'm much more interested in having housing officers, school kids, choirs, musicians, firefighters and motorcyclists and cricketers all signing up, maybe in groups, maybe individually. And just so there's one of those firefighting engines that I was talking about there. I think it's really good when you get a whole fire engine going through the city with a big white ribbon on it. It's great. And it just keeps the message going, not just one day a year, but all the time. There's another interesting picture there of a rugby club, and they, through their local authority, got sponsored to wear a white ribbon on their strip, and so they did that, and they were a bit diffident. They said, oh, what we do is charity. That's charity, that's all right. But then a few weeks later, they had a white ribbon sponsored game, and they'd done some education about it, and they were much more cool and really supportive of the work. I was very, very pleased with the change in attitude in the few weeks between when they launched the strip and when they had the white ribbon game. Okay. People pledge from all over the country. We're reckoning there's about 60,000. It might be up to 70 or 80,000 now, but that's pathetic. It should be 800,000, should be 8 million, But you could say it's great because we've had this many people who specifically signed the pledge. But signing the pledge is easy. What you've got to do is try and tie people into doing other stuff, like take their photograph, get them to sign something, to say, I am going to do some more, and try and nudge them up the pyramid of activity from signing the pledge to becoming an ambassador. We've got 2,000 ambassadors, but we've probably only got 50 active ambassadors. So getting them to be active, it's always pushing people a bit further forward. Okay, I'm running late, so I'm going to whiz through these last few slides. Targeting campaigns. We target campaigns in lots of different ways: music, sport, education, trade unions, etc. So there we are. Let's look at some of these more specifically. The White Ribbon Sports Campaign. The British Asian Rugby Association, great supporters of ours. The Welsh rugby team wore white ribbons and had a white ribbon on the front of their team coach. That's because the Welsh government very keen on supporting our work. This is something from the Tri-Nations. We just went to their thing and a photo call they were having and ambushed them with our banners and said, hey, why don't you have your photo taken with our banners as well? And so we got the captain of the New Zealand, English and Australian rugby teams. And this, more poignantly, is Hull rugby team, all wearing shirts saying men taking action about violence against women and girls. And it's poignant because their ground holds about 20,000 people. And that's the number of women who suffer violence in their own hometown every year. So what you can imagine is their ground full of women who have been abused each year in that city, and that they put on something on their PA system and in their program and took a real commitment to it, the club, that year. And that's because the city realises that that's a good way of engaging the men in their community. Similarly, a different sport, cricket. The Prime Minister Theresa May wore that cricket badge to the England Test match. We ran a campaign with some women's organisations, both in Leeds and Leicester. And we ran a bowling out domestic violence team. That was a women's game. And there's the Secretary General of the Commonwealth who attended that game, actually. We're holding our banner, and this is me with a community team based in Bradford called Bradford Park Avenue, all supporting our work as well. White Ribbon works on music and festivals. There's Harry Styles, One Direction. Nobody here's probably ever heard of One Direction. They're very famous, they're very important. And the same with the specials. There were lots more pictures of bands doing stuff, but mostly just photo calls. Faith groups is quite good, and they see it as an important part of their work. But every November you'll see faith groups saying, preaching about the issue, and they support us. And that's another easy way of doing promotional work, is doing projections onto buildings. Either writing on the chalk, that's hard work, writing in chalk on the pavement, but it's easier just to get a projector and bang it on the side of a building so that everybody can see it for 2 weeks. And we've had a lot of that in prominent buildings in the UK and in other countries as well. Other organisations do it. I think it's a really effective way, because people will say, well, what's that mean? What's that white ribbon? Oh, it's back to sport again. This guy, this very good looking man, was the captain of AC Milan and captain of the Italian football team. He also made the FIFA World 11 of all time. He's called Paolo Maldini. And he said there were a whole page signed by all the players. Now, this is just one sentence from it. When playing, the violence of one player damages the whole team. And therefore, also in life, to ignore violence when we know violence exists creates damage for the whole of society. Therefore, we've decided to come down to support absolutely with you the campaign of White Ribbon Men Against Violence. But we have to be more than a slogan. Wearing ribbons is not enough. So I like going to conferences because I always learn a lot when I'm at a conference, listening to people. So self-education is vital. Campaigning events, campaigning together with other organisations. Here we have cooperation with Object about sex objectification, and with Rape Crisis Northwest, and doing fundraising and speaking. And here's an organisation which, and this is quite often the case, somebody will work with us and say, yeah, we want to work on White Ribbon Day, but we also want to raise money for our local refuge. And so they do that, and everybody benefits. We get the slogans out there, we break even or make a bit of money on the merchandise, and then people sell them the merchandise and make some money for the refuge. But it isn't the way. We should be out there campaigning for adequate funding for organisations. And finally, fundraising, awareness raising. Lots of materials. We have lots of banners, lots of postcards, and lots of enamel badges. And what we find, someone once said, if you want to engage with people, don't try and treat them all the same, because we're all different. I haven't got that much in common with the punk rock musician who's 18. But I can sell him a badge which says, I'm a punk rock musician and I support White Ribbon Campaign, and then he wears it, and then all his other friends who are also punk rock musicians will talk to him about stuff. So we try and develop materials for lots of different organisations, actors, cricketers, musicians, supporters of Safe Place for Refugees, because refugee women suffer enormous abuse on their journeys. Footballers, rugby players, the LGBT community, supporters of a particular rugby club there, and that's a really good idea because dead easy for them to get rid of a lot of materials. And each badge always goes out with a label with a sticker which says what White Ribbon is about. We need to do more work deeper with each organisation that we work with, and work with more organisations. That goes without saying. Why aren't you doing more? Exactly, we need to do a lot more. As long as we're always honest, accountable to the women's organisations, respectful in what we do, and proactive, people will always understand. And if they don't think you're doing the right thing, they will suggest how you might change it, and that's important too. And that is how I end. Ask your organisation to get involved. Just do something, because action is so vital. And that's me. And now I have finished, and I will stop there and hand over to Tom.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen, my title page?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here and to follow you, Chris. And I've been a great admirer of your work for a long time. My name is Tom Churchyard. I know many of you in the audience, so it's a pleasure to present. And as you know, I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Kwakha Indvodza, which means building a man. And it implements in Eswatini and then increasingly recently more in Southern Africa as a whole. And today I'm not really going to speak much about KI and our work. I'm going to talk about a new topic to me, and just some thinking and some thoughts that I've had over the last few years in terms of the relationship between gender transformation and public health promotions. Kwakha Indvodza was always formed, and our work is always based on the sort of three pillars, which are gender-based violence prevention, male health, and economic strengthening for men, and particularly younger men, as a gateway towards better lifestyle choices. And so based on these three pillars, for years now, we've been trying to push a package which is not just a health package. As you know, in the Southern African region, we are very used to, unfortunately, to pandemics and to urgent health responses, and to the big budget donors and big budget projects that respond to those health needs. And they are very important, but for years we've been trying to push a package of interventions that speaks about gender transformation and economic strengthening for young men as well, as a way of achieving longer term health outcomes. And so today I'm just really going to speak about some thoughts as to when these two meet and how we can perhaps better plan together between public health messaging professionals or public health promoters and gender equality activists and experts in terms of designing better materials for public health. So it probably presents more questions than answers, but here we go. I think it's fairly well noted that and fairly well known that gender transformation work improves the appeal of and the access to and ultimately the uptake of health services for men. This is, documented by a number of far better academics than myself and far more established than myself. But essentially, the conclusions are, across a number of different contexts, quite comprehensive, that gender-sensitive men are able to deconstruct the idea of healthcare, the feminization of the healthcare, of healthcare clinics, the emotional vulnerability that may be a barrier to healthcare, and ultimately the sort of risk that men may see healthcare uptake as being. But also, gender transformed men or gender sensitive men are usually more acutely aware of their own mental and physical health, their own needs, and more in tune with their own health outcomes as a result of various lifestyle choices. So obviously, gender sensitization work and gender transformation work will eventually have positive outcomes on healthcare services. But often that is a longer term goal. That's a goal that we may not have time to really consider. And so what we often find is the case is that public health messaging, the flip side is not true. The public health messaging does not always equal equality outcomes. So whilst gender transformation equals improved public health, often we can demonstrate that public health messaging doesn't always factor in gender equality as an outcome. Stephen Lewis, poor guy, gets dragged out quite often in these kind of environments, but he said quite famously in 2004, at the sort of height of the epidemic, that the HIV epidemic here, that people say to me, Stephen, what about men? We have to work with the men. Of course we do. But please recognize it's going to take generations to change predatory male sexual behavior. And the women of Africa don't have generations. They're dying today, now, day in, day out. And he got quite a bit of flack for this kind of statement, because it obviously excludes men not only from the health response, which men have historically been excluded from for many years, but also from the idea that men can make a conscious gender transformation in their lifestyle. And the question and this is really echoed throughout public health messaging as well. In a donor-funded sort of public health world, targets are everything. As we know, there's an awful lot of money global funding going into public health issues. HIV, TB always leading the way, with malaria, other health issues, and recently COVID, of course, following behind. But short-term goals and targets are everything. So at least historically, in some instances, short-term gains, public health gains, especially in pandemics, have resulted in the sacrifice, one would say, of longer-term normative change goals. And we're going to unpack that a little bit in the coming slides. So in targeting men, what images are we using essentially? What messages are we giving to men, and how is that affecting their long-term understanding of masculinity and masculine norms and gender norms, in place of the quick and immediate needs of public health messaging? And how much are we basically willing to sacrifice? And then the question that I've left on the screen is, what happens when an audience is tested? These messages are tested through an audience, as many of them are. There's millions and millions of dollars in these campaigns. Of course, that audience tested. But what happens when that audience testing comes back to say that a particular image of masculinity in a public health poster or public health material appeals to men, but it isn't necessarily, as we say, gender transformed or gender equal in its appeal, and it has inherent harmful images and norms in that material? What happens when men prefer such images? When we were at IAS in 2019, I was speaking to a colleague from Zambia, and he was talking through a campaign that he wanted to run about taking your ARV medication. And he was running through the slogan that says, bash it down. Essentially, it's translated into English as bash it down, as in push down the HIV, suppress it. And that was essentially the messaging that he was running with in his campaign, that said, to men, suppress the HIV. But in that, there's an inherent violence. There's an inherent allusion to men as dominating and violent. So he was telling me at the time that this message had been tested and was very popular, and people were loving it, and it resonated with the men that they'd used in audience testing. And so really, when you look at these these messages, you, as we're going to now in the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes, really see two categories that they fall into. One being sort of a hyper-masculine approach, an image of masculinity in this public health messaging, and one being a hyper-sexualized, or both, it's possible. And it really, I want to start at home with something that happened in Eswatini at the very start of the circumcision drive in 2008. As you know, circumcision came onto the into the scene as a HIV prevention method, and many lauded it as the savior of countless lives, and perhaps even the end of the epidemic itself. And so by 2010, in Eswatini, we'd come up with a campaign that read Sogo Ngobe, which means cut and conquer. And the idea, of course, was to cut and conquer the HIV. And of course, VMMC, voluntary male medical circumcision, always involves men, and men are its only real target group. So you can see that this is the logo, and very soon, you see the idea of a strong man dominating again, and the Siswati reads cut and conquer. Now this obviously had two challenges. One, it reinforced these images of masculinity that were previously alluded to, but also it presented quite harmfully the idea that you could conquer HIV. And so very soon, within the 4 years of the campaign, it was suggested that this campaign may not only have just been gender insensitive, but also may have led to an increase in risky lifestyle choices and an increase in ultimately in transmission of HIV, because men feeling like they had cut and conquered, they had circumcised, they could now do what they wished, and they didn't have to take further preventative measures to protect themselves and their loved ones from HIV. Similarly, in the very early days, and it's a bit unfair to bring out such early imagery of HIV, because we know that the HIV campaigning and messaging from the very early days was very unfortunately placed a lot of the time. But I had to use this from Australia. It's an Australian campaign in the mid to late 90s, and it was actually revived in 2009, so not so long ago, to read Condoman, and to try and give a positive image of condoms and safe sex, to replace what was a very negative image in Australia of HIV. I think the very first images of HIV in adverts came out as very nightmarish figures. They used even the Grim Reaper at one point, and tombstones and black and white imagery to suggest that it was a death sentence. But replacing that was this image of Condoman, and again with the tagline "Don't be shame, be game," and the muscles bulging out of his uniform there, and not shown in this image, but obviously is his partner, who was Lubicious, I think her name was, his female sidekick, Lubicious, who was supposed to be about lube. So he was condom and she was lubricant, but she was obviously scantily clad and presented her own image of gender and gender norms. And then lastly, second to lastly, on this image, we have this. More recently, we have this idea of less hyper-masculine, perhaps, but equally harmful, I think, in some of its messaging. This idea that you should man up and take an HIV test, and perhaps the best of them are good partners and friends in South Africa around this campaign. And it was very well received and very well lauded in South Africa to say, be a man who is not afraid to know his HIV status. And even this one, which is by far the best, I think, of some of the positioning that I'm going to show you today, still centers on the idea that men should not be afraid, and that men should conform to image of masculinity that is fearless and that provides and that mans up, steps up, etc. And then worse still, and these are still running. This is a big billboard in Lesotho and a number of places in America. Knockout HIV, and of course the very muscular, hyper violent boxer there to physically dominate the disease. And then a little bit better, but on a slightly different track perhaps, but still conforming to a similar image, is a poster on the right there for targeting men who have sex with men. But even so, they're still using the tropes of masculinity that present men as physically dominating, violent, ready for sex, etc. And so we see this throughout the messaging that men are expected to, as I say, in a violent way, dominate or suppress the disease. And it's not just with HIV, but with a number of other public health concerns as well. And then similarly, we see the hypersexualized image of masculinity, and these are just three that I pulled off recent campaigns. Again, the one on the left is from Southeast Asia, and again presents men as always up for sex, always available, willing to conduct no strings attached relationships, multiple concurrent partners, loose living, etc., and conform to a particular body type that is quite harmful in its image of masculinity. The one up the top is from the States, and the one down the bottom is from Europe, targeting MSM community as well. Again, now interestingly, this top one at the top that says "Hot Weekend, Man Up Monday" there was a study in the States, and it saw a twofold increase in the number of STIs detected in Virginia County over the trial period. So it worked. Scientifically, it worked. And yet, obviously, from a gender equality perspective and a gender transformation perspective, I have my doubts over the long-term effects of using such imagery and messaging towards our gender equality goals. And then similarly, this isn't just an HIV thing. Of course, we can see this in other STI issues, and then more recently in our COVID response as well. We know that men are more reluctant to wear masks, are more risky in their COVID interactions. They travel further for work in more public spaces, and they're less likely to wash their hands more regularly. And whilst these are not advert or promotions as such, it's still fairly early days in the COVID response to be able to really see how the men have responded, or the messaging around COVID has appealed to men and or challenged our idea of gender diversity. And so it's not all doom and gloom. There have been some positive moves in the last years, and of course, some of the images I've used today are a bit dated now. Some of them are from I tried to keep them in the last 15 years or so. In more recent years, we've seen a lot more move towards positive body image, positive images of masculinity, images of couples discussing and being HIV safe together. Images of older men, and less sort of what we would call typically models used in these campaigns, and images that and messaging that elicits a response of something deeper and something more complicated than simple binary images of masculinity. So. And I particularly like this last one. I can give you honor, idealism, vitality, and all the sort of complicated human nuances and emotions that go with that, over just men who are physically dominating or sex objects. the question really is how to celebrate men who make such positive life choices without making them superheroes and without making them hyper masculine in this way. How we can do more of this, really. So, and as I say, more questions than answers. But in conclusion, I just wanted to run through two quotes that I found interesting. One's from the famous politician and the star of the movie Greatest Showman, who says, "Bad press is better than no press." P.T. Barnum. And P.T. Barnum was certainly knew his thing about self-promotion, about changing, about selling things, about advertising, about messaging. And so really, the question is the same true of our public health promotions and messages, considering the immediacy of some of our issues, of our public health issues? Is it better to run an advert that might show a man who is conforming to a gender norm or a trope or a harmful idea of masculinity and still get a public health message across than one that is more gender equal, like the predecessors here, but maybe isn't quite as hard hitting, maybe isn't quite as memorable, maybe isn't quite as it doesn't have quite so much of a shock factor to influence behavior change. And then similarly, Carl's Jr. CEO, Carl's Jr. is a fast food joint in the States that runs an awful lot of quite highly testosterone fueled, some would say misogynistic adverts, very risque at least. And he says, if people don't complain, I go to the head of marketing and say, what's wrong with our ads? So of course, I sympathize with health promotions people who are faced with the decision of running a gender sensitive advert that might not be as memorable, or one that's more risque, but that relies on norms and harmful images of masculinity. And so finally, what can we do? Well, as I say, no easy answers here. The key question is, how much are we willing to sacrifice, really, in order to achieve public health in the short term? How much of our long-term aspirations might we be willing to sacrifice? But certainly the public health promotions professionals, and including those in ministries of health and the people who approve such messaging, need to talk to gender equality experts and activists more closely and communicate more regularly to ensure that they don't continue what has been a trend recently of relying on such tropes and harmful images. We need to talk to donors and funding partners. There's, as I said before, millions and millions of dollars in such campaigns, and we need to make sure that they are gender sensitive and not just locally sensitive, but also conform to what we see as international best practice in gender sensitivity. And perhaps bring in the private and public partnerships into that as well, because obviously businesses and corporates have a huge amount of expertise and capacity in advertising and in promotions, and they know what works and what doesn't. And then lastly, we need to continue to change, obviously, the norms and attitudes to ensure that when people audience test these messages, they don't come back with positive feedback for an image or message that we would see as inherently harmful, especially when it involves gender and masculinity issues. And so I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. I'm sure other people might have questions, and I would love it if we could unmute and talk to each other. But in the meantime, I'd say to Tom, okay, so what's the position then with adverts we don't like, or what's the position about changing the focus of the agencies? Should we be trying to talk to the agencies and say, you shouldn't be designing these things for your clients? I used to teach advertising students at Manchester Met University, so I would try and teach them from something called the Adbusters collection, which is sort of a challenging existing advertising stereotypes. But do you think it's up to us to actually make complaints when we see these inappropriate adverts? Are you still there? No, Thomas has gone on mute.
Certainly. I mean, there is a phenomenon in the last 10 years in the corporate advertising world that I'm sure you've heard of it, shock advertising or shock advertising. You know, the idea that if something is banned, controversial, risque, it will get more views. And even if it's banned from television and other mainstream media, it will get views online and, through WhatsApp and other messaging services. So, it's a challenge to say, for us to say how much can we mobilize against such images, because a lot of them are very subtle for a start, or somewhat subtle at least. They're not inherently offensive. And then secondly, that might be, an advertiser's goal in the end.
Yeah. No, but does the argument then run, well, there's no point in complaining, because if they get complaints and it gets banned, they're making their point.
Sure. A couple of years ago, Gillette ran a very famous advert based on their slogan, "The best a man can get," and of course, Gillette has been arguably a proponent of this idea of hypersexualization and hyper masculinity in advertising for years. This is away from public health promotions now, just in pure advertising. But they ran an advert that they hoped would align them with the Me Too movement. Some of you might remember it, but it received a huge amount of backlash for the very sort of binary position it put men in. I think somewhat, in my opinion, at least a bit unfair in the backlash, in that they were trying to at least use their corporate platform to promote a message of our cause, but maybe it had its flaws, but it didn't maybe deserve as much as it got. So yeah, it's a very complicated world in that regard.
I think part of the problem is I think in education, maybe that's because I come from a design and art direction education background for a few years anyway, at least, because do they know any better? And until they do, maybe they're just going to keep churning out sort of tropey, stereotypy images, and so we, do we just turn around and say, oh, we want a different approach as consumers, or do consumers want a different approach? That's the trouble in terms of capitalism.
In some ways, you can forgive corporate market markets and advertising agencies for that kind of mistake, but it's more difficult to forgive public health experts for creating
that's true,
using such binary images.
Morna has a hand up.
Hi everybody, and thanks for two very interesting presentations. I just want to, I raised just a point at the end about Tom's, just that I think this is a very interesting question, the balance between gender equity and then effective public health messaging. And of course, that's something that many of the kind of multimedia edutainment kind of agencies have actually tried to do to work within this. And it's very difficult. And I'm just suggesting that maybe there are no single messages. And maybe it might be relevant and appropriate to target different kinds of messages to different groups. So, for example, some unfortunately got a split screen when you were presenting, so the images were not all clear. But certainly, when you were talking about the targeting towards MSM, I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with you that these are all necessarily sort of hyper masculine. Certainly, they were pretty sexual, very attractive, etc., etc. And if you're talking about a campaign that is marketing towards a particular group, and that then had a very effective increase in uptake of STIs screening, maybe that's, I would say that falls into a slightly different area, and just thinking that maybe we do need to think there are no single public health messages. Just one comment on that. Chris, and also I just wanted to say on your presentation, thank you, very interesting, obviously particularly focused on kind of issues in the north. And I'm coming from, I'm based in South Africa, and as I'm sure you know, we have endemic levels of gender-based violence here. What is perhaps less well known is that the levels of violence against men are 5 to 7 times even higher. The rates of violence against men. And so I kind of always want to throw in, and it's not a particularly popular point, but I want to throw into the discussion about gender-based violence why it is that we never consider violence by men on men as being gender-based. If we acknowledge and understand that, like women, men are born with biological sex, and beyond that, they are immersed in and exposed to the whole way through their lives, a whole range of highly gendered influences. And in particular, the exposure to violence we know is so much higher from a very young age with boys. So why are we not considering that part of gender-based violence? And to me, it's a little bit of the blindness that we have when we talk about gender. We still think about gender as being gender about women. And I think it actually undermines almost the argument about this being gender-based, this being men acting out towards women, something which is to do with gender, and other men acting out towards other men, something which is also about gender. So I just wanted to put that point in. Thanks.
I'm against all violence, and do it a lot at the moment. I've just been doing work around Palestine, etc., etc. But I completely take your point. That's. And I hear it, but I think it might be because it's an easier message for us, a bit, and that's why. Goodness knows it's hard enough for us to get endorsement from individuals to talk about men's violence against women. But if we just said all men's violence is inappropriate, then I don't know. I'm clutching at straws as to why I'm not doing it.
And I'm not even really expecting you to answer. Or I think it's completely valid for people to have an area of work that they work in. They don't have to work in. We don't all have to work in everything. No. But as somebody who's been involved in the issue of a kind of a blindness about men's health for probably 20 years now, this just seems to be another area where there is no discussion and there's no debate. And so, being the person who likes to raise, I just wanted to put it in there. A thought, generally.
Thomas, do you have a?
No, other than to agree that obviously men's violence against men is based on a construct of masculinity that says dominate women, dominate minorities, and dominate other men. And by doing so, obviously you end up that leads to violence. I'm maybe as a segue there, interested in the sort of the alignment to rugby and to nightclubs that you've got. I used to play rugby myself many years. My brothers did, my father did. I'm a sort of product of a rugby playing family. But how is there ever a path that one has to walk in that regard to say, well, there's obviously the rules of the game and a game that promotes a certain level of aggression, with and aligning it with your work in the field, in the sphere, as Morna says, of violence against men.
Absolutely, but it is played within a set of rules, in this, you could almost say boxing as well. We've had endorsements, which I don't tend to use, from 2 world boxing champions, saying, oh, jolly important your work, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that they spend their time, bashing people's heads in, the least, but of course there are the set of rules. But with the rugby, it was two reasons. I mean, one of our sports campaign director, when we had one, was a rugby international. He was the only Asian to have played rugby for England, so he had links into the rugby sports, and it was easier to get links and support, goodness knows it was hard enough, than, for example, the Premiership football teams, who basically turn around and say, well, you know, how much are you paying us? A bit like a lot of celebrity endorsements. They wanted sort of a payback, or they wanted to see what was in it for them. But yeah, I agree with that as well. Although, see, I play football. I mean, so you played rugby. I played rugby at school, but I still play football now. And I'm writing a bit of an autobiography, and one of the guys said, "Oh, you should call it Stud Marks Down Her Shin," because one stage we were playing some women's teams, and so we said, "Oh, you went in for that tackle really hard," and I thought, "Yeah, well, I play the same way against women than I would play against men." And it's a joke that I tackled them particularly hard. You know, I don't think I just tackled them the same and didn't stand off the same way that some of my colleagues would. And I'm proud to say that some years ago we were in something called the Anti-Racist World Cup, which is a European competition. Well, it's a world competition, but it's based in Europe every so often. And we entered a community team in there. And my team won the Kick Sexism Cup for our contribution to the tournament. And I was very pleased with that. And it was partly because we were talking about some of the work that we were doing, and we had a mixed team to enter it as well. But I seriously hear what you say about organised sport, and it is a constant issue. And in that respect, I see the growth in sponsorship and promotion of women's sport as a huge contribution to equality, because it just says, you know, women playing football is the same as men playing football, and I just think it's going to be a real stride towards recognition of respect. I don't know, it's just my feeling. That's all. Any more?
Perhaps as a follow-on then, rather than just making it a dialogue, but do you see that there is, I'm British myself, so sort of reminiscing about nightclubs and the hospitality industry in British cities, and how dogmatically misogynistic it can be, sweaty, dark nightclubs in any city in the world, but particularly with the culture of alcohol and everything in the UK. Is there any have you seen any commercial value to the clubs themselves sort of promoting themselves on a kind of women friendly or white ribbon message? Is there any commercial value to them there that could synergize with the campaign?
I think there could be. I think there should be. Well, certainly when we got some take up from some clubs, the regional managers said, "Oh, this is really good," but we didn't have enough capacity to be able to sort of push that and say, "Okay, well, what about your other 20 venues across the region? Why not get them all signed up as well?" We just didn't have the ability to do that. But there is an organisation called Safe Spaces for Women, and I think they're trying to do the same sort of work. But when you speak to young women, as I said, I went at this event in this with this school, and this dialogue between school students, women's school students and men's school students, and all the women were saying, "Oh gosh, every nightclub we go to, it's harassment all the time." And there are commercial advantages, but I think you've got to be far-sighted to see that.
Sure.
Otherwise, they'd be doing it anyway. They don't need our push to do it. But you could say,
I remember they used to do women getting free before midnight, all that kind of, that's sort of horribly, Anyway, but and there's a commercial element to that, of course. So I was just wondering whether a similar kind of avenue could be explored.
Yeah. What I found depressing and sad is that actually the festivals haven't been interested in working with safer venue messaging. Well, we've had it hard to get to them, but we haven't got the resource now. We haven't got anybody working on a music campaign, but there are some other organisations trying to do that, and they're finding the same sort of resistance. And you see, why? Because at your 3-day festival there of 20,000 people, there will be sexual assaults, and apart from lots of sexual harassment, there will be actual sexual assaults. And when one of the local authorities worked with us, and they said, "Oh yeah, okay, well at our local festival we're going to have a white ribbon stand." They had it one year, and the next year they had 2 stands. They had one for white ribbon and promoting appropriate behaviour for men, and they also had a quiet area because they were getting so many referrals as well, because there's so much stuff going on. But in terms of the venue organisers, the wanting to take on the issues, it's almost negative for them to. It's like when you say, "Oh, well, we don't want to be associated with a campaign challenging violence," because then people will then think we're a violent community, whether it's our local authority, whether it's our nightclub, whether it's our sports team. People will think there's something that we're dealing with an issue that's there. Well, of course you are, but it's better for us to pretend that it's not happening at all and sweep it under the carpet. Same with schools, who have an obligation to do it. Lots of them don't want to address the issue of what's going on in their schools, and it's brave when they do. There we are. Has anybody got things to say? I think we've finished. Would you say so, Thomas?
I'm done.
I'm done. Anybody else? Anybody for anybody? Is there anybody there? I think that was very interesting, and good luck with your work. And it's really important. And I could. Why did you do that then? That analysis. I mean, is it more of an academic interest, or actually hoping to get it challenged?
This is just from, as I say, that Sogo Ngobe campaign that we do VMMC work here, and luckily they changed the campaign to Soge Nawe, which is circumcised now, circumcised today. But it certainly didn't have as much of an impact as Sogo Ngobe, and so from that, and I think public health promoters have been feeling their way in the dark for a long time. I mean, we had a poster here that when I first got into Eswatini about on all the billboards, and it had a young man on it, and the central image was a young man, and it said Safiso loved to play around or something like that, and Safiso got HIV, and exclamation mark. And I think the positioning of HIV has certainly changed over the years to be much more cognizant of HIV positive people and HIV and the stigma that surrounds HIV. But the tropes that have always been throughout about gender still seem to remain. So this presentation was merely just a collection of thoughts based on that. Maybe we'll do something else with it, but for now it's just at the cross section of our work, really.
I mean, in some ways, while public health has got some power there, because they're paying for the promotion, they're designing the promotion, yeah. So
Certainly.
So potentially, if you can work on the people who are doing the promotion and persuade them, then that's a job well done. Okay, I can see that our host, Laxman, is back with us. Do you want to wind it up for us, Laxman?
No, I think it's going quite well, but I just wanted to pose a question probably to both of you as well, with regards to the work that you have been doing, Chris, with celebrities, with politicians, and so on. When we talk about the work with men and boys, we also talk about men and boys ourselves reflecting on our own power and privilege. So how do you actually work with these celebrities, politicians, primarily men in power positions, to take them through a process where they can actually themselves reflect on their own behavior and the power they hold, and their own mentality and sense of what it means to be a man, and whether what have you found while that engagement you are trying to do? Because then I think one is that we work with celebrities and put them in pedestal, like in a campaign, without themselves going through a critical reflection of the power and privilege and their own behavior when it comes to violence, discrimination, abuse, or exploitation. So that's certainly something that I'd like to hear more on, how actually that's something that we keep on struggling with, working with people in power positions, because sometimes the critique that we hear from our feminist colleagues is that we are putting men into pedestal. And Tom, very interesting analysis indeed, I guess. The whole, there is a BCC community out there, the social and behavior change community, communications community, who are actually struggling with the same fact that why do you refer to the Gillette ad, which got backlash, but backlash was also from these highly masculine institutions to say that how dare you categorize men in that way, and emasculinate men as such, and that was a big concern. And one thing that we keep on thinking about is, why do then public health as a sector, which we should have imagined that they would be a little more sensitive on reinforcing the gender norms, keep reinforcing the same gender stereotypes? Is it because of the fear that if their intention is to reach out to a particular group of population, reinforcing certain stereotypes on in itself become appealing to people, and hence they will join those initiatives? Or is it that they are frightened of challenging people with their advertisement on some of the root causes that is actually the problem at the end, right? But I think in these campaigns, they keep on reinforcing the same root cause, but only look at addressing the symptoms. And that on itself becomes a vicious cycle within the public health sector, or even the international development sector on field on gender equality. So that we'd like to hear a little more on some of these thoughts, and something that we struggle with, and where does accountability fit in for those of us who are doing the work?
For me, I start with the last part. I mean, accountability to me is actually to the women around me, and women's organisations that we work with, and they're very quick to suggest when we're doing something inappropriate and doesn't work. But I hear that the concern about the celebrity on a pedestal, I mean, horrifically, one gets that oneself, oh, you're doing wonderful work. No, we're not. It's our responsibility, which is why I chime in with it. It's our job to do that. But people still say, I mean, because for so many women, their experience of the men is so negative that as soon as they see somebody who isn't negative. They think you're a wonderful human being as opposed to a normal human being, which is why I use that word normal in my presentation. And so it's hard also. Praise is nice. It's nice when someone says, "Oh, I think you're doing great stuff." And it's hard also then to take a critique from people like, "You're not doing enough." Because all these things are true, but we always like to hear the nice things about ourselves. And in terms of holding celebrities to account, I mean, like in my pipe dreams, we're pleased enough to actually when people acknowledge it, and that's the trouble. So we sort of tend to grab that and say, "Oh, isn't it really good? They've said they think our work is important," or they're doing this endorsement for nothing, or they're doing a presentation for nothing, speaking at a conference. But what I find horrendous is that actually some of the women's organisations in our own community have to shell out huge fees to celebrities to get them to say, "I support the work of," and I think they're the people who should really be exposed to start with in terms of getting a change of behaviour. I'm also a bit grumpy with some men in what I would call the men's industry who say, "I'll come and speak at your conference. Oh, actually, there is a fee of quite a lot of money." I'm like, what? Just do it, and blah, 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 blah. And that never comes out. People said, "Oh, this person came to speak and they were really wonderful." Just cha. So I get a bit defensive in that situation because actually you're are suggesting things that White Ribbon could be doing that we're not doing, and they're quite legitimate suggestions of things we should. But I also hear that what you're suggesting is completely and utterly reasonable. And one of the things that I've always said and been very impressed with is the Men Engage Code of Conduct, which I think is a separate workshop on today, just this afternoon, which I think is the bee's bloody knees. It's really a superb document. Although my comment about that is it's really hard to live up to, but that's another issue completely. So I hope I've manoeuvred around your question and without getting too bogged down in not answering it, but it's all good. And Thomas had some strands to answer there as well, I think, didn't you?
Sure. I just think there's a fine line, Chris. I completely agree with you that there's a commercial element to a lot of the people who make speaking, public speaking, dinner speaking, conferencing, a career out of those pursuits. And there's still space for volunteerism, for passion for the cause. There's obviously a sustainability model argument to that as well, and it's we're diverting off topic here, but there is I started as a volunteer. I've been a volunteer for an organization that has grown to a fair size now.
Oh, good.
And now I'm a employee of that organization but we're very proud of our volunteerism roots. But there is an argument towards sustainability to say, where's the line between an organization like White Ribbon being a going concern and ensuring that they can do everything they want to do, and whilst still being in counter to those that make significant money from this industry. Anyway, besides the point. In terms of accountability for us, in terms of the topic of the presentation, obviously it's the advocacy that I spoke about with ministries of health, with health promotions units, with with donors and with those that develop these messaging. And I'm particularly looking at public health messaging here, not advertising more broadly, because that is it's a bigger beast. But in terms of public health messaging, certainly there's accountability there. In we should be holding those people accountable. And in the same argument, Laxman, you remind me, ironically, of the flip side, which is also true, which is if we want men to take up public health services in facilities, we have to work on, in this part of the world at least, what is the almost universal feminization of that space. And work on, men who creating spaces in health facilities where men feel comfortable accessing information and services. And so, to take the obvious example that comes out, and I know Kate DeVell and a number of others have been doing work on this to say, if we've got pictures of breastfeeding women on posters on the wall in a waiting room of a health clinic in a rural, conservative, patriarchal Swati village or Swati community, then that's going to deter me as a man from accessing services in that space. It's going to create a space that is unattractive to many men. So there's accountability both ways in that regard, because public health has been predominantly a female focused industry for so long. For years, the HIV estimations of the HIV transmission estimations across the world were done by taking women who came into clinics to access usually neonatal or antenatal services, and then by doing so had blood tests and found out they were HIV positive. So the statistics for the whole country were based on women accessing services at clinics. And so in my long-winded answer, there is certainly, of course, accountability from the men's pro-feminist movement to women's organizations and the women's movement. In public health, there is obviously always the balance between targeting messaging to populations that need it at that time, whether it's key populations, men, women, children, etc. And there's accountability both ways there. For us as well, using different images and using different voices, different messages about men and masculinities is a hard thing to do. It's a brave thing to do. We've designed campaigns before at KI where we don't use what you would typically see as an attractive focal person in that campaign. But how many adverts and campaigns use figures that are not the conventional photogenic idea of attractiveness and with the conventional body type, conventional hair and face and etc. makeup, and it's very difficult to do because you risk losing some idea of appeal in your audience as a result. But slowly, and by brave step, I think we'll get there. And then the last thing is just avoiding at all costs any kind of idea that puts men in a box. So, even with the best intentions, we've been tempted in the past to talk about, men as responsible breadwinners, or men as, the benevolent leaders of their family. And all of these sort of approaches have some validity to them in a patriarchal setting like this, but also they still create a box for gender norms to live in and thrive in. So whether it might be more positive than our idea of and our image of masculinity currently in this part of the world, but it's still a restrictive norm that doesn't allow men in all their diversities to explore gender expression.
Exactly. It's a process. So I think, there is no quick solution to it. No, I think we all have different experiences with this work, and one of the important things that we and the broader feminist movement have come to realize is that challenging power and gender inequalities is a long term, and that's where the project ideology of, oh, we'll come to your area and do a 1-year project and solve issues doesn't work in this work. So I guess we'll have to have that mindset that we are not doing a specific development project, but it's a long-term process that we want to initiate, and that phase needs to be then looked at. How can we get more people on board and slowly work with them to challenge the issues, the agendas that we have, and also do that together with them. So I think one of the things that we have kept on now that have come out in the work on masculinities is around the decolonization model and the importance of looking at it from a decolonial perspective, so that there is no, that brings a lot of dynamics within the power, and also to the point what she left actually. Morna was talking about.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about gender-based violence, then if we look and understand gender as a power relationship and power inequality as an analytical framework, the abuse of power by powerful men and the lens of masculinities applied to that makes it relevant to have this conversation on gender-based violence can be to others, men as well, but with different identities, which are based on same stereotypical gender norms and ideologies on what a powerful man means from a. So that's where I think masculinities as a concept becomes relevant to unpack further how power operates among men and diversity of men that is there. So I guess it's a good unpacking of. And it can be on phases. So, I didn't mean to critique Chris on what White Ribbon is doing, but I think, you have done amazing mobilization in the UK, which I haven't seen in any other White Ribbons around the world. But I think my interest of learning was then now that you have all these powerful men across the country joined you, now, what is the next phase with them? Is it still that they will go and talk, or will be a little more sort of political work with them to sort of unpack and uproot
I think there's
stereotypes?
There's a great deal of difference between getting a photo of a guy with a badge stuck on him and actually him coming to a meeting or entering into a discussion. That's the problem, we're more likely to. I claimed a real victory 2 weeks ago. I was giving a presentation to a school, and Friday evening I talked to the male staff, and Monday I was due to speak to the male students. And on the Monday, the deputy head said to me, "Oh, on Friday, one of the staff, he really didn't like what you were saying about stuff, but he went home and he talked about it. And he came back today and he said to me that there was a lot in it." And actually, that's what's important. It's not what I said, but the fact that it's got him thinking, and he talked to his partner who actually put him right about male power and male time. He didn't see it. It's like the fish in the sea. So he said, "Well, why are you swimming around in all that water?" And the fish says, "What's water?" We're all sloshing around in our entitlement, and actually it has to be pointed out to us that it is entitlement, and it's a great start to point it out. But wow, then for somebody to say, "Well, actually I'm going to discuss what it means for me and what I'm going to give up or what I'm going to gain by giving," talked to years ago about men saying to him, "What do you mean I'm powerful? I'm not powerful," and it's all about our perceptions. So, but it's been a cracking time to have this conversation and to listen, and I look forward to hearing more. Always look forward to hearing and learning more. It's all good. Okay, I think we're done.
Tom, anything to add before we move on to rounding the session for today?
No, it's a pleasure. I'd love to sort of try and see if there's scope for, or it may have already been done, but some sort of guidelines on, or not guidelines, some sort of collection of best practices, I suppose, for engaging ambassadors in this kind of work, because it's been something that we've, flirted with as an organization for many years. People have warned us sternly against it, because what happens if, one of your ambassadors comes out in the press and ends up being a proponent of the behavior that you're trying to advocate against, and etc. There's lots of reasons for and against the use of such personalities and things. But I wonder whether there's any
Sure.
As an avenue of investigation, or as a Men Engage kind of support to such work, to say, throughout the world, these are the lessons learned we've found in using ambassadors for gender-based violence or gender equality work. Something I'd certainly read.
And of course, you could have lots of self-education. You can only become an ambassador once you've done this online work and this module and that module, and then maybe. Yeah, but what's found sad is that we've had all these guys who've taken these modules, so that's a good thing. They've learned about violence, but then they don't take it any further. Just think, why bother jumping through these hoops unless you're going to do something about stuff? Ah, dear. Lots to do.
There's a bit of learning. Not sure, Chris, you are aware of from the work with ambassadors that White Ribbon Australia did.
Yes.
So do look at their website. They have some amazing materials developed.
Yeah. And then, of course, they decided to cull it, to cull a lot of.
But they made a lot of learnings. They made a lot of mistakes, but I think they have been able to learn quite a lot from what the work they were doing with this ambassadors model that they had, and they even reached to a situation where they had to sort it down. But I think there are quite good learnings coming out from that. But apart from that, I am not really aware of any ambassador models being used within the Men Engage membership. Obviously, there are people who have used celebrities in some of the campaigns, but they did a, not sure if you were, either of you were in Delhi Symposium. There were a number of, Bollywood actors who came as celebrities and spoke. So yeah, the process that they did was to look at the background of those people, whether they had any experiences or relations or cases of violence, abuse, and exploitation in their past life, or if they have had, and what did they do to sort of correct or rectify those behaviors, and circling it with the people who have experienced harm. So these are some of the things, but they are not well documented. The one for Australia is a little more documented. You can find their documents in the website, so White Ribbon Australia. But I'll also check with White Ribbon in Canada to see if they have actually produced something on because they do have started working with sports people and sports groups and clubs. I'm sure they have some stuff, and I'll be happy to share that with you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Great. Okay, so thank you, and it was.
Thank you to the audience still out there.
Yeah.
And I'm out of here.
Thank you for joining, at least staying with us, Anna and Gustavo. We really appreciate. So those of you who would like to continue joining the symposium and sessions for the coming weeks, this is the link that you can visit. And there, if you scroll all the way down to the dates, then you'll find the details of the sessions, as well as the link to join and register from there. And one thing we wanted to, and then, if you are still using this app, you can engage, you can share your thoughts, questions in different languages, submit your questions, and all the recordings of the sessions are put up in the Men Engage YouTube channel. Feel free to look into YouTube for Men Engage, and you will be able to watch all the recordings of the sessions so far. And also this one will be put up in a couple of days once we do a little editing, and we'll be having it on the YouTube channel. And these all are in English and Spanish. One announcement that we have right now is that about the closing of the symposium. So it will happen on the 22nd of June. And the rest, stay tuned for more information. So do, put this in your calendar that it will be on the 22nd of June, 2 p.m. Kigali time in Rwanda, so Central Africa time, and 8 a.m. US Standard Time, Eastern Time. So do put this in your calendar, and we will come back to you with all the rest of the information. And thank you for joining, and we look forward to having you in the coming sessions. And you all, wherever you are, stay safe. And thank you once again on behalf of the Alliance and the co-organizers of the symposium. And thank you, Chris and Tom, for your amazing sharing and reflections. This will continue. We will all continue to evolve, be stronger together with all of our expertise and experiences. Thank you. Thank you for being with us.